welcome to the latest in the series of ECIST podcasts. My name's Leigh Forsyth. I'm physio and head of improvement for therapies and social care within the emergency care improvement support team. And today I'm joined by Karen, Julianne and Kathryn from East Sussex. Thank you so much for joining us today. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself? I'll start with Karen.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting us, Leigh, to share our journey with your viewers. So my name's Karen Poole. I'm an AHP rehabilitation consultant. I'm a physiotherapist by background, and I work at East Sussex Healthcare Trust, and I also have a couple of roles within the integrated care system around rehabilitation.
Fantastic, thank you. And Kathryn?
Hi, I'm Kathryn. I'm an occupational therapist and I work as an advanced clinical practitioner and clinical therapy lead for intermediate care at East Sussex Healthcare Trust.
Thank you. And Julianne?
Hi, I'm Julianne and I am a service manager for our intermediate care service in East Sussex Hospitals. So we've got 3 rehabilitation units within our area and I'm a physiotherapist by background.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. That's just sort of very different roles and responsibilities here. So there's across the country, there's quite a variety of community beds, and I think what we see at this time of year, especially, is at the points of pressure that the numbers of community beds tend to expand, and I think this is reflected across the country, and some of the units don't necessarily come up in as organised or systematic fashion as I think we would necessarily hope. At any one time, we have around 8,000 to 10,000 community beds. They sort of fluctuate with some of the spot purchasing models as well as some of the more established units. We know that the length of stay can vary significantly. I think the national average is around about 25 days, but the range is from about 7 to 48 days. About 90% of the people coming into these community beds are coming from the acute hospital, and the vast majority of patients we know are over 75. So around about 85% of the people are over 75. So the flow through the units and the community beds is absolutely vitally important to keep everything moving and flowing. And we're having various different models that are across the country that are trying to achieve this. But what I've been really impressed with from various discussions we've had over the last few months is just what you're doing down in East Sussex and how the process you've built and the cultural change you've gone on to get to this point. And so I'd be really interested if you can just tell us a little bit about the journey you've been on and where and how you got there.
Lovely. Shall I make a start then, Leigh? Would that be helpful? So really, by way of context, I was appointed a rehabilitation consultant back in 2018, and one of the first parts of my role, I guess, was to have a look at our rehabilitation pathways, particularly our community bedded rehabilitation pathways. And so at that time in 2018, I moved myself over to our community hospitals, so particularly the Irvine unit, which is where Kathryn, Jules and I are all speaking from today. And the Irvine unit, by way of context, it's a large 54-bedded unit, multiple pathology. It's a standalone unit away from the acute trusts, but we do have supported clinical cover. And so I guess really that first ask was, as an integrated organisation, which is what East Sussex Healthcare Trust is, our intermediate care units are a really critical part of that flow. And we, like all other trusts at the time, and still continue to have challenges on a daily basis with flow. So my role in terms of a rehabilitation consultant was to come in, to have a look and look with curiosity around what was actually happening within our rehabilitation units. Kind of the big challenges, I suppose, were that there was the perception of the unit themselves that we were perhaps not getting the right patients into the right beds at the right time. I think there was some dissatisfaction in terms of our workforce, in terms of that delivery of rehabilitation. There were the system pressures around flow. We knew that we were that vital component or cog in that wheel of turning flow around the system. And there was definitely that feeling that with the patients that we were seeing, there was a lack of capacity to deliver the rehabilitation, which was required to make those important quality outcomes for individuals. So I guess really I'm going to hand over the majority of this to Jules and Kathryn, who are my colleagues that I work really closely with in intermediate care. But one of the main points that I hope that we share with your viewers today is that in order to be able to really kind of look at your process around flow that would be supporting particularly the P2 pathway, it's more about looking with curiosity and understanding the culture. What we were trying to do here was build a sustainable change. And actually, before we can make some assumptions around what was important to change within our pathway, we had to look with curiosity and we had to understand. And there are a variety of different ways in which we did that, which I think Kathryn and Jules will take you through that journey. But taking our team and our staff with us on that journey was really important. So I guess one of the first places that we started was in terms of coming together and trying to have a shared understanding of the kinds of patients that we thought needed to be in the unit, where that veered from what was actually happening in practice. But also, I hope that we will reflect in this conversation is actually where this journey has taken us in terms of the ability.
Oh, you've gone onto mute, Karen.
Sorry about that. So I guess where I was just getting to was just to say that actually that there was a real opportunity, I feel, in this journey that we've been on. Whilst it felt that there was a need for us to look differently at the pathway, I think what we have seen along the way is real opportunities in terms of the clinical caseloads that we manage, the way the service is designed, how we are able to raise our profile about what we're delivering here, but also that real innovation in workforce. So what I'd really like to do is probably just hand over next to Jules to give us sort of a bit of an outline around some of those first steps that we took around looking with curiosity at our caseloads.
But yeah, I suppose just to echo what you said, Karen, is that I think, and I'm sure that many units can probably vouch for this, that we end up being so supportive to our community that we often do whatever it takes to be that supportive, service. But ultimately, we then potentially lose our identity in a way. So it's looking at how do we improve that? How do we look at, the skill set we've currently got within our teams? Because within our units, I'm really proud to say that we've got a very highly skilled workforce, and it's about using them appropriately and as efficiently as we can do. But it's also looking at the current cohort of patients that were coming into the units at that time. We seem to have a mixture of all sorts of different patients, from frailty to orthopedic to stroke to amputees, massive cohort of different patients. But actually, in terms of really being able to be clear about the level of need they have, the level of rehab support they need, the medical support that they may require, we really weren't very clear on that. So it was just trying to identify how do we do that. And obviously that a lot of that comes down to some of the qualitative feedback you get from the staff, but it's also about the data that we have had to capture as a result. So one of the things that we started to look at to begin with is how do we look at sort of rehab indicators. So in terms of what the patients require at that time, we use some of our safer, national safer sort of descriptions that we use in terms of when patients were not medically fit. How do we pull that information when patients are we're looking at sort of the complexity of the patients. How can we be really clear about what that means to everybody? And also the other thing too is that if we've got that right, is thinking about, well, is everybody sort of cited on the fact that when patients don't need to be in an inpatient bed, what does that mean for us? Do we understand that actually it gets to a point where, our community services, and I'm also really pleased to say that within East Sussex, we've got a good sort of community network out there. So we've got got urgent community response teams and JCR teams. So it's just thinking about how do we engage and really think more around that 24-hour need for rehabilitation in inpatient bed. When that's not required, then how do we then look at moving that patient out? So that rehab complete, which is how we described it, was really, really important for us. So the patient would come into our care, we'd carry out all the different assessments. Every day we'd have a board run set up where we would look at those patients between us as a multidisciplinary team. We'd try to understand what their needs are on that day-to-day basis, but we would also ask the question around, are they rehab complete within an inpatient in our community service, inpatient service? And that took quite some time for that to become embedded, really, I think. And, you know, there's lots of things around the rehab complete terminology, which does raise a few eyebrows and makes people feel like, actually, hang on a minute, you know, we may not be finished in some professional body, but how, you know, doesn't necessarily mean they need to be within the unit as a result of that, but it sometimes makes people anxious about, well, is my role as an example as an occupational therapist not a priority that someone then becomes rehab complete? And of course that's not the case at all. It's just knowing and understanding what level of that of need is required for an inpatient bedded unit before we then consider that outward.
And how did you get agreement on that sort of rehab complete line, as a for want of a better word?
It's a really good question. It took a lot of engagement with staff, a lot of discussion around the table as a multidisciplinary team to truly understand. And you know, there was lots of as I say, it wasn't perfect. There was lots of discussions, lots of I wouldn't say hostility, but certainly lots of questions around how we describe it. And I think in the end, you know, I think we managed to sort of be able to describe that. Again, it's just thinking about, can this be done by our community services? You know, how do we engage? And we do things like Cup of Cake Collaborate sessions within intermediate care, which are really great as well, because also when you get the team together with a cup of tea and a piece of cake, it's always helps the conversation, I think. But we do things like that, which again helps us to engage better and be and work together to make these decisions together. So rehab complete to us in essence was really about, you know, as soon as a patient had been assessed by our OT colleague, occupational therapy colleagues, the equipment was ordered. Actually, there was nothing more that they could do, so therefore they wouldn't warrant being in an inpatient bed, and therefore it's then looking at that onward journey, really. The good thing about this sort of thing as well is that it fed really nicely into the national MRD information that we report to NHS England. So also within that, there are questions around whether somebody requires that inpatient rehabilitation unit. And I think that when people because we report quite highly around MRDs every day up through NHS England, so it's about giving that information and really then asking yourself, does that person need to be there? And then that fits in really nicely with the rehab complete as well. So it's kind of like gone from the journey of using that rehab complete to then linking into what nationally everybody is doing around MRDs as well. I think it's really fair to say, and I'll hand over to Kathryn in a minute, a bit more about the culture stuff, because my role has been very much around the analytics and the data around it as well. And that's something that really has evolved over time. We started off with a spreadsheet of some factors, you know, of our safer descriptors, etc., our rehab indicators. And try to figure this out, I think, for ourselves and how we could be descriptive with it. And as time has gone on, we've managed to sort of, yes, integrate it with some of the MRD information, but also we've worked really, really closely with our business intelligence colleagues around setting up our online system. And we've currently got Nerve Centre, which we use within our units, which, as Kathryn describes, we are an integrated trust, and that is something that's used in our acute sites as well. So it allows us to be very fluent with our information. But within that, we've set up a dashboard on there so that actually we can use things like rehab complete. We can use information gathering around some of our tools, which I'm sure Kathryn will talk a little bit about in a minute, the information that we capture around that clinically, so that we can be clear on the types of patients that we have within our units, and allow us then to be clearer about when they no longer need to be within our inpatient unit. I'm very aware that I could talk all day about the analytics, but instead of talking all day at you, I think what I'll do is I'll hand over to Kathryn to talk a little bit about some of the clinical aspects of data capture.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so at the risk of sounding repetitive, it has been a journey. And I think actually when you're part of that journey, it's quite difficult to remember all of the steps that happened within that, and actually quite the extent that went into making that a cultural shift rather than it just being kind of a part, because these kind of incentives I think come and go, and then it's like onto the next thing that you've got to embed. So it's actually, how can we embed something sustainable that just becomes part of how we function? And I think with that comes quite a contribution and quite a lot of work around culture, winning hearts and minds, bringing people together, getting people to think very differently who have worked a certain way for a very long time. I think was quite a challenge when this is how it's always been done. And I think seeing something different as not a threat, which might sound a bit silly, but sometimes actually people kind of get a bit defensive about change. And I think it was working through all those change processes. And I think as a clinician, I was working as a clinician that was going through this experience. I think it was quite frustrating when you feel like you're getting inappropriate people consistently into the unit, which we were doing at the time, because sometimes they're perceived as a quick win from the system, but they're not a quick win, because actually all of your resources go into then getting that patient in the place where they should have been in the first place, which is home. So what this kind of enabled, I think, was to kind of understand and articulate the added benefit of kind of being able to better describe what we should be doing, of moved away from getting those inappropriate patients, which I think helped the therapy mindset to kind of really get on board with it. And I think using the rehab complexity score as we kind of shifted towards that really helped us to define where is the point that we're kind of comfortable, because actually the lower complexity patients, that we're getting them, they're not in the right place of where they should be. Their care and their needs should be delivering at home with our community teams. So what is it that we're, as a unit, that we're capable of delivering? So I think the rehab complexity score really helped us to define that and be able to articulate with our colleagues across acute and community where they sit. And I think it really refines then the type of patients that we have here. And I think over time now that's just become very naturally part of everyone's way of thinking. So I think, on average, every month we're getting kind of quite high end of the complexity, probably higher than we would have imagined where we sat, a couple of years ago. But we're really not getting the patients at the lower end of the complexity, which is right. But it's taken, a while to get through to that process. But it definitely feels like the patients that we're getting now within our unit are the appropriate patients for our level of capability, their level of complexity. And yeah, it's just kind of emerged that it just feels quite naturally part of what we do now. I think what we did find when we initially started the rehab complexity score was that it only gave you one factor of a person, so that rehab complexity, and what it didn't necessarily tell you was about their acuity, their disability, their dependency. So we definitely went on another journey looking across as a system about how we can actually holistically articulate what that patient needs look like, rather than just kind of just using one crude score that tells you one thing. It's actually, how do we make sure that our nursing levels are sufficient enough to match that patient's acuity? How are we getting our therapy levels right to make sure that we're appropriately managing that dependency? What's that long-term disability management looking like? So it's definitely an ongoing journey as well to try and articulate what the best tools are for us to be able to evidence that, and that works for us and gives us the right kind of feedback. That's been a lot of trial and error. It takes a bit of admin support to get right, and I think on a clinical kind of day-to-day basis, I think that's probably been one of our bigger challenges, is actually how we can make the time to make that sustainable without a significant kind of added admin investment. But we definitely, I think, got a really proactive mindset now of looking differently and trying to kind of figure these things out, which I think has been definitely part of that cultural change, that everyone's kind of, I think, thinking quite proactively now about how we can always be improving kind of that messaging that we're giving and getting it right for the patients.
Yeah, and so right, and think so. You start with the rehabilitation indicators that then morphed into the sort of the complexity over time. Probably that need of greater standardisation and that predetermined definitions. But actually, there was still the cultural piece to go alongside, which I think is always the really, really difficult piece to really crack. I'm assuming that you've probably got a few skeptical clinicians involved. How, as part of that, how did you address some of that sort of skepticism and reluctance, perhaps?
Shall I
think,
answer
yeah, I was
first
going
of
to say,
all?
Karen,
And then
you had your work cut out with some of that, didn't you?
Yeah.
it was definitely a journey, Leigh. I think that's what I'm going to say first of all. However, to be really fair, I think eventually everybody did cut. We all started swimming in the same direction, but I think it takes time. Systems, and this kind of nefarious system, if you like, always want things to happen very quickly, and actually to get that sustainable change, it doesn't happen quickly in reality, and we all know that, and hopefully that's what Kathryn and Jules have been sharing with those who are going to be listening back to this. But I guess in terms of what we actually did, so one of the first things I did was I moved into the unit. Okay, I really feel quite strongly that you can't affect change if you don't live and breathe it. So I didn't previously work at the rehabilitation unit, but actually as my first step as a rehabilitation consultant, I moved into the unit so I could feel what it was like. For me, and I've done some podcasts before, I'm really, really keen on the feel and the sense rather than the spoken word or the written word, whatever is coming out. Actually, you've got to take the temperature of what's happening. Can you go at their pace? Can you be careful not to overwhelm people? Kathryn and Jules were clinicians at the time working with me. They were on that journey, and and both of them would have had their skepticism about where we were going and was it the right thing. Dialogue, Leigh, is keep talking, present information in as variety of different ways as possible, and absolutely that's something that I started that journey, but definitely that mantle has been taken over by my colleagues now. We've done the collaborate sessions with a cup of tea and a piece of cake, as Jules said. But we've done formal sessions, we've done training, we did board rounds. I sat with individuals, I sat with most of the individual senior leads, both nursing and therapy, spent time with them, talking with them, trying to, I was on a learning journey, Leigh, to be honest, as much as they were. I didn't have the answers. I still don't have the answers. We learned together. It's iterative. Each day was something new. Talk to everybody. We invested in speaking with our housekeeping staff, our estate staff. It's not just about the clinical aspects. We are a community of practice here in intermediate care in East Sussex Healthcare Trust, and actually we needed to take all of those voices. So there are multiple different ways. The other thing I would also say is that the unit at that time, its morale felt low when I first came, and together we have worked to make that morale much higher. And actually I feel that our unit generally is really proud of itself. The workforce here is proud of what they contribute, it's proud of what they achieve. But we did other things, like we invested in the environment, so we did some huge environmental advancements and enhancements. We wanted the patients to feel that this was a better unit. It was, what was the patient telling us, not just what our staff were telling us. What were the patients telling us? How could we make our offer better? This is about rehabilitation, and rehabilitation isn't just the therapy and the nursing aspects. It's about the social aspects. It's about how it feels to be in rehabilitation. So if we really want to be an efficient unit, we've got to come at this from all angles. So there are so many aspects that we did, and actually, as Kathryn and Jules have said, it's only today when we've been reflecting back, ready for this discussion, about all the tiny steps that we did that we've probably forgotten. We would present information in all different ways. We put things up in the corridors, and there were lots of different ways we've done it. And but what that investment did, and it took a while, I guess, for staff to have that patience to see the change. Change doesn't come quickly, and it doesn't come overnight. And sometimes you're already in it and you think, oh, actually, that does feel different now. But actually, 4 years on in our journey, I feel that we are inconceivably different to the unit of 4 years ago. And I think, Jules and Kathryn will probably just share a little bit about our workforce, about how that's changed, because that is what's really important. We wanted to make an environment which our staff wanted to come to work in, felt that they could use their clinical skill sets to the top of their capability. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand back over to Jules and Kathryn.
Yeah, I was just saying, just going to say about the workforce side of things. I mean, we've been incredibly lucky that through all the work that, which as Karen and Kathryn have described, has not been an easy ride for us, but we have really managed to pull that data together, pull that work together, so that we could have some investment in us as well. And I think that's the other thing when it comes to staff morale and where we, a shared vision for us. Actually, it's been able to say these are new roles that we've never had before, that we've suddenly got some investment in. So we've now got some rehab support workers within Bexhill Urban units. We've got activity coordinator roles, and we've got advanced clinic practitioner roles, which is absolutely fantastic. And we wouldn't have this unless we did this work, unless we really invested in us. And I think as a result of having these roles in place now and having that investment, it does allow us to be more excited about the future and excited for the direction that we're heading and the change that we've, already gone through an immense amount, but we've definitely got lots more to come. So I think it's really important that when people talk about data collecting, particularly when they talk about change that we're constantly going through in the NHS, actually there are lots of positives to all of this as well. And sometimes when you've got a workforce that's you've got large sort of vacancies, challenges with recruitment, etc., sometimes people can't even see the wood from the trees. But actually we've felt all that, we've gone through all that as well. It hasn't been an easy journey. This isn't change is always going to be challenging, but the benefits, we see those benefits if we can keep going with it and we can keep motivating staff to move in that direction. And the engagement of the team has been really key for us. We're an award-winning team as well. We've always had heroes of the month here, things like that too, from an integrated trust sort of pool, and we're all really proud of that. We celebrate everything that we have within our intermediate care services, because actually it's been a tough time. So, but we're managing to get through that.
And with the what I find really, really refreshing is you're 4 years down the line, those collaborate sessions are still going on. And I think often a lot of the places we work with from ECIST, the collaboration happens for the period, a small period, project period, and then it stops. I think how critical has those collaborate sessions been in progressing the model?
I wonder if Kathryn, do you want to just pick up about how we're continuing that collaboration journey?
Yes, I think it happens in kind of multiple formats really throughout kind of all bandings and all different ways, and it's just ways of kind of bringing together everybody. And I think we've got a really kind of proactive change mindset kind of embedded in just how we function now. So I think it wasn't like that initial period of innovation. It's actually we're innovating all of the time, and I think we're really fortunate that we've got like a really good kind of cohort of really quite highly skilled clinical leads who are really proactive with driving change forward. So I think within that you need to have that collaboration at kind of different opportunities to keep that moving forward, because I think you've never kind of sussed it, have you? I think change is, there's always room for improvement, and we're always thinking about, well, where do we go next? What's the next step? How can we be even better? So I think at any one time, everybody's got a project that they're actively working on proactively. Everyone's assigned to something. We take those times and opportunities to come together every week, actually, I think, to have those kind of informal collaborations, and then the kind of more formal kind of events that are arranged. Kind of it happens in so many multiple ways, because as I said, I think you're never done, are you? There's always that kind of, there's always room for improvement and moving on and just being the best that we can be.
I think just to add to that as well, I think it's also what gets thrown at us from a demand and capacity point of view, and reporting nationally, etc. There's so many things that allow us to continually evolve and really think about how we need to do things differently to meet the needs of our population group and the needs of what the expectation of us. So I think that's the other thing that fits in there. It's an ongoing communication as a system, really, as well as a specific service.
And I guess as we've, over time, as Kathryn and Jules have said, we've really invested in our workforce in terms of both additional posts within our workforce. We've looked at that innovation culture, and it's definitely a cultural mind shift, Leigh, that we've got here. But there's also something about that clinical investment as well. So as we've seen that complexity profile creep up, because we've responded to what our system has needed, and we've been able to amplify the offer offer in our community services, so that actually we are being able to now take patients with more complex needs than we previously have done. It's also enabled us to really invest in our clinical workforce, so really extend their reach and their skills, so making that kind of, that raison d'etre. Why do they come to work? We all know that clinicians really thrive, don't they, on really utilising their clinical skill sets to the best of their ability. But that's not where we were in 2018. Our skill sets had sort of almost ceilinged out, if you like, because of the profile of patients that we were managing at that time. And now actually working really collaboratively with our community colleagues, there is some really, really exciting projects going forward, which are about a dual community and intermediate care approach. So we're really, really honing in on that integrated provider mindset. We're really trying to really kind of emphasize that capability that we've got, and we recognize that other providers won't have that if they are either an acute provider or a community provider, but we can really draw on that integrated skill set. So there are benefits. It's a growing journey. It's a continuing journey, I think, is what it's fair to say.
I think you touched on a really interesting point there. I just want to really highlight for some of the listeners and viewers of this around the complexity. Almost the perverse outcome of here is you've got a much higher dependency and complexity coming into the units. And so I know I've mentioned it a few times, but that's having the real focus on data has enabled that conversation to take place, to look at the workforce, look at the roles, trying to get that 24-hour mindset of rehabilitation being a culture rather than an operational delivery thing as well, which I think is really, really important just to highlight here.
And it also, I think, Leigh, as well, I think touching on something that Jules had mentioned earlier, it really helps us to provide that clearer narrative across the system around why people are in bed, in a community beds.
Yeah.
So, if we have longer lengths of stay for higher complexity and higher dependency patients, we're really clear on that. And Jules and our colleague Katie have really developed a really iterative tool that Jules was talking about that really helps us to kind of, show where we've got high complexity and dependency cohorts, and actually that length of stay may reflect that compared to other patients within the unit where that length of stay may be shorter. Whereas actually prior to this, what we had was just an average length of stay for the whole unit, and in 54 beds, Leigh, patients are not homogenous in those 54 beds. They are very different. They are very individual with very different needs. And actually, how do we show that we are a responsive and reflexive service based on those needs? And we also feel that there is something, whilst we are really clear about working with our community colleagues to make sure that patients move into the community and towards home at the earliest point that they can, we are all signed up with that that approach. But actually it is also about understanding where you can add benefit through an inpatient stay, which may they take longer to achieve those quality outcomes in the community. And we work very much collaboratively with our community colleagues to come to those decisions about when is that right time for some of our really complex patients.
Yeah. And I mean, we started touching on it a bit already, but what are some of the outcomes you've seen from over the 4 years?
I mean, I think one of the key things is just what Karen said, really. I think we can be much clearer about the complexity of the patients that are coming through. And that's really key. I report through our IPRs, our appraisal process, just around how we're doing as a service. And it's given us the ability to, be accountable in terms of understanding why patients are within our beds and why they are for that length of stay that might be well above what they should be. And I mean, at the end of the day, it is, as Karen describes, it does correlate. A higher complexity does generally correlate with an increase in length of stay. So we've been able to feed that back to senior managers, which is really helpful. We weren't able to provide that in the past because we didn't have the data to support us around that. And I think that's one of the key things that we have right now. But I think the other things too is that we do a lot of patient stories. We gather lots of patient stories, and we've had lots of recording of things of patients' progress or pathways right through from intermediate care into the community. We've shared that on Twitter. We've shared that in our senior leads meetings. And again, there's nothing more valuable, I don't think, as listening to somebody's rehab journey and the outcome and the experience that they've had. And I think that's something that we do very well, actually, is being able to share that as widely as we can do. So from that from that point of view, that would be how I would describe how we capture that, really.
Yeah.
I think
And
the other impacts really, Leigh, as well, is around profile for rehabilitation. So I think hopefully by the very fact that we're doing this, we've developed a profile of the quality service that we deliver through East Sussex Healthcare Trust. But I think it's not just that. This is about a barometer around rehabilitation and the recognition of rehabilitation as a discipline, as an entity, and the importance of rehabilitation. If we want to support flow, then rehabilitation is a critical partner in doing that, and doing it well and doing it efficiently. And there are also those outcomes in terms of our workforce. It's about providing that skilled workforce and engaged workforce. We've already talked about recruitment and retention. So there are lots of and quality outcomes. So the other thing is around developing that breadth of offer for East Sussex for our patients with longer term needs. We've developed huge amounts of skills over the last 4 years. We often support some of the specialist pathways. So we may start that rehabilitation journey for patients who are going on to specialist rehabilitation whilst they're waiting for those beds, which means that they are starting that rehabilitation with us. They're not needing to wait within an acute environment. So, we're getting to see a greater breadth of conditions and exposure to that learning, which I think has been really valuable, and those collaborations with our community colleagues. So there are a number of different outcomes, I guess, from this.
I was just going to add to that as well, actually, is that because we do share our story, and I think it's so important there because it has been a journey for us. But one of the other things just to add there is that we're also working with our neighbouring trusts in terms of, learning from each other, but they're really keen to learn from us. And then how do we standardise some of these processes? And I think that's something that we're really proud of. We're working really closely with one of our neighbouring trusts at the moment on some of the rehab complexity scoring measures, some of this work that we have done over many years. They're keen to learn more about, and we're keen to share that. And I think that's also something as an outcome that, to think that we are kind of, creating, or we have this journey has been such a challenging but really sort of quite empowering journey for us, that actually other people are learning from what we've achieved so far.
Fantastic. And if people were thinking about going on this journey, is there any tips you would give them, or anything they should completely avoid?
Kathryn, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah.
Gosh, there's probably lots of things. I think for me, my biggest learning was sometimes it's the obvious, and I think trying to include everybody, you're always going to miss somebody out. And I think from my learning, we work within a divisional structure, and I don't think we brought medicine along perhaps in the process as much as we did with our own division. So I think there's maybe some catch-up work to do retrospectively with actually bringing the medical division along to kind of where we're at with our thinking and some of the shifts and changes that we've had within our patients. So I think it's just, you probably never consider everybody, but that's probably some of the learning that I think I've taken on board. But there's probably masses of things that I can't think of right now on the spot, but I'm sure other people have got something to add to that.
I think it's around making sure that perfect's not the enemy of good, and making sure you've taken the step, you've engaged as many people as possible, which sounds like you did in spades. I think you're right. I completely agree. Every time we do part of a change, there's always someone we miss out, and it's not intentionally. You just don't go there.
And I guess the other thing, just taking that helicopter view and standing back, is that, what might start out as a process ask, and often these things are a process ask, aren't they, is that recognizing that actually to reach the process that you think you want, which you probably don't end up with, it's around engaging. It's about a cultural mind shift. That's the sustainable bit. That's the important bit that you need. The process or function will fall out of that. And so look with curiosity. My advice to people would be just stand back and look with curiosity. What do you see? Look in multiple ways, and don't jump to assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's some fantastic advice. I know about 10 years ago, someone told me that change moves at the speed of trust, and I think this is really sort of reflects that sentiment. So I think we're probably coming towards the end of our time here. So that just leads me to say a massive thank you for sharing your time and your story with us so generously. It's really humbling and fantastic to hear about. So thank you. And to everyone watching or listening, thanks for your time, and we look forward to welcoming you back to the next in our series of podcasts.